Es braust der Liebe Wolle und Scheu.
The truth is you won't live honestly with me.
You are listening to The Holistic Voice with your hosts, Austin Vitaliano and Jordan Reynolds.
All right, welcome back everyone to another episode of The Holistic Voice. Jordan and I are sitting down and chatting with Alexis Davis-Hazell, Assistant Professor of Voice and Lyric Diction at the University of Alabama. We are so excited that we finally have a chance to sit down with you, Alexis. It's been quite a long time since we saw you back at the convention. Remember, we were sitting next to you. We were exhibit buddies.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Time has flown.
And it's been quite a busy year for you. I know that we've been trying to go back and forth, trying to set up a time. So I'm glad that everything has worked out. But
Yeah.
I just remember at the convention, we had a really, really good conversation about your experience in developing and then later teaching dramatic voices. You've had an incredible career already, with Verdi's Aida, and you do a lot of Puccini productions and Porgy and Bess. I mean, you've had quite a wealth of experience in doing some of that. And what stuck out was how you said, growing up with a more dramatic voice and how you navigated something like that. So I guess the first question is, can you just talk a little bit about your experience growing up with a dramatic voice and how you found a teacher to help out with and just to explain those experiences?
Sure. It is kind of a weird story. Because I think the quality of my voice was recognized by my first teacher in undergrad pretty right away, but she didn't expressly explain to me what it meant. And I kind of was super green going in to school undergrad wise. I really didn't know what I wanted to do or what I could do. I just knew that I wanted to train as a musician, and I originally was considering music education for a bachelor's degree because I come from a family of teachers. And so when I even found out you could major in music, I thought, okay, well, this will be perfect. I'll go be a music teacher. And my choir teacher kind of scared me out of it, I think by accident, and told me that my keyboard skills weren't very good and that I was going to need much better keyboard skills if I was going to be a music educator. So I said, well, let me go for performance.
Wow, always encouraging. Great.
Turns out that that's where I was supposed to go. In any case, my teacher assessed me as a soprano coming in, and she said, oh, you're going to be Aida, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. And she gave me kind of a lot of very advanced literature, I think because she was excited about the sound that I made, but I didn't understand my voice. I didn't know how it worked, and I didn't know how I was doing what I was doing. And so I think that some people respond really well to sort of having a whole bunch of stuff thrown on them or at them, and I didn't. She gave me Puccini stuff like right away, and I just didn't do well with it, and I didn't know how to do it. She taught me how to breathe. She really taught me how to breathe in coordination, and it gave me the strong foundation for that I have now and that I have built on. But in terms of some other things with resonance shaping and vowels, and I didn't understand what she was talking about. I was just super green, and
Yeah.
and it just took a while for me to understand what was going on. And as I felt my voice changing, which is, it's bound to happen about halfway through your undergrad, things start shifting. And I had a big shift. I've discovered, or at least I've noticed this as a teacher, I've noticed that, young women wind up having some kind of a shift that goes on around 19, 20 years old. And I don't know that anyone's, put big names on it. I haven't read all Ingotisa to figure out what they call it, but the same things you were doing at 17 or 18 don't necessarily work, or something changes. I think it's partially hormonal, partially the beginning of, laryngeal ossification, whatever. Things change. And what happened is that I kind of lost a little bit on my top of my range, and my middle filled in very nicely, and I gained a fifth on the bottom.
Wow.
So it's a big change.
Goodness.
And so she was kind of, had me again, soprano repertoire, and I started to gravitate towards the mezzo repertoire, even though I didn't even really understand what that was. I just sort of instinctively wanted to sing that stuff. And she kept arguing with me and saying, no, 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 it's too low, it's too low, it's too low. And then finally, that sort of a shift happened. And she read an article about, it was probably in the Nats Journal, about how there weren't any real altos or basses anymore because no one's allowing anyone to use their chest voice properly. And so she said, okay, fine, we'll try it. But of course, being that age, I was kind of, especially when it comes to sort of dramatic type of rep. First, for higher voices, I think people feel more comfortable putting them in the Puccini as kind of a warm up or a holding area until, you get a little older. But for lower voices, I think there's even more of a tendency to be very cautious and just sort of keep you in the lyric repertoire until it seems like you're ready. And I got stuck there. So I was trying to sing repertoire. It's not that the issue is that the expectation on how, it's not that the repertoire is harmful by any stretch of the imagination, but the expectation of what you should sound like and how easy it is for you to do should be different. And so I spent what felt like a very long time to me not knowing how to approach things. And because I have a natural mimic ability, I was sort of able to make sounds that people wanted me to make that wasn't really my voice. So that kind of like compounded the issue.
Sure.
So it's just been sort of a gradual stepping thing of, addressing different issues technically with different people that I worked with. But it really was, honestly, it was like at the end of my master's when I started coaching with people outside of school and getting the kind of feedback that led me to understand what the dramatic voice is and that I should be, that's the repertoire that I should be working on, and the approach or the expectation of what things sound like and what they feel like. I started to, get more of that information. So really, it didn't occur within school at all. A little bit. Usually the folks in the opera theater department were the most helpful for me, saying, I hear your voice going in this direction, but it's just not age appropriate for you right now. That's what I heard a lot.
Yeah.
In my mid 20s, going through my late 20s. It's just not age appropriate. You will sing this, you will sing this. But for now, it was kind of like, well, I have no rep now. What can I sing now?
Right. Give me something. Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting that you have heard these experiences from folks, because I definitely heard that in my undergrad. What are the characteristics that you realized in your master's that make this dramatic voice, or when everybody is saying, you're not ready, or you're not, what does ready mean? And when did you start to realize that? So I know that those are two different questions, but yeah, what are those characteristics that you eventually realized in a dramatic voice? And when is somebody quote unquote ready to be singing that type of rep?
Yeah. What I understand now, I'm 43, okay? And what I understand now about, I think, what people are worried about, or what means you're quote unquote ready, I think ready should be switched out with easy or easier. You do get to a place, the older you are, and the explanation that makes the most sense to me that I've read about is again, going back to, some vocology stuff with Ingotitsa, is the explanation about the ossification of the larynx, the cartilage in the larynx, that the older you are, the more, bone-like or more stable the larynx, those cartilages are. So they hold up. First of all, they stand up to pressure better, and they create a more reliable and stable acoustical setup when you know what you're doing. As well as the hormonal changes that continue to go on up through your 40s and so forth. I can understand, being as old as I am now, and seeing how things have improved and how much easier and more reliable my technique is now, not just because of time, but because of literal physiological changes. I can understand why people are always saying, wait, you're not ready. But I don't necessarily know that that is the best way to describe it for people, to help them to understand what they should be doing. So the biggest influence on my opinion on this has come from the opportunity that I had to work with the Institute for Young Dramatic Voices. I had the opportunity to coach with Dolores Odchik and observe her teaching and the teaching of her team for 3 or 4 weeks back in 2012. And that experience, and sort of watching people talk and hearing, things, helped me to understand better how to look at it. Really, we need to be concerned with the way to release tension and the way to shape resonance in a way that is not creating a ton of resistance and is not manufactured. The biggest thing, I think, that the biggest paradigm shift for me was to be able to change the expectation of what something should sound or feel like. I think we all a lot of times get stuck because we have an incorrect concept of how something should sound or feel, or an incorrect assessment of what someone should be able to do. I got told I was over singing a lot, and it was a relief to finally sing for someone who said, "Oh, those moments when I was being told I was over singing, when this sort of eruption of sound would occur, I was finally being told, oh, those are the moments where you're actually singing."
Wow. I've heard some amazing things about Dolores Odchik's program there, the Institute of Dramatic Voices. And is that kind of the go-to place for dramatic voices? Because I've heard of that resource, and then I know Jane Eaglin is starting something at New England Conservatory for Dramatic Voices. What other resources are available for those with dramatic voices, or those who might think they have a dramatic voice?
Well, I mean, Dolores program is definitely a great resource. It has, of course, skyrocketed in popularity now. Back in the beginning of that program, she was just taking anyone who would come, really, because she just was trying to get it off the ground. But now it has really, gained a reputation, and it's quite competitive. And they are truly looking to find those unique voices that have the potential for, the sort of an fast track, A-level career that they can, sort of do early intervention on, to get them set up with the right teacher or on the right path before something happens to sort of, derail the progress.
Sure.
You know what I mean? What I found in all of my observation was that there's nothing being taught that could not be done by a lyric voice. It's truly the expectation. It's truly the recognizing when there's something that seems sort of wobbly or off kilter or whatever, that sort of allowing more room for error in the very early stages. There are some young voices, like even in their teens, that exhibit these sort of unwieldy and strange characteristics that you can identify, but there's just not a whole lot you can do with it. But the worst thing that you can do, I think, is to try to make them sound like everyone else. I mean, you certainly can't make a voice have larger size or heft or weight than it does. You just can't. But you can teach, a proper foundation to release resistance and release tension. You can teach, resonance shaping in terms of vowel choice and tongue release and this kind of thing. I think it's just our expectations of what something should sound like that we have to be aware of, so that we don't put a clamp on someone that shouldn't be clamped in order to try to make it sound like what you think is normal for that age or whatever.
Sure. So do you say that teachers are misdiagnosing dramatic voices when they're using their full voice as tension or as these other things? Is that
sometimes? I mean, if you don't have a concept of what that sound feels like or is like, I could see that it would be possible to mistakenly or just assume that it is manufactured, or that it is tension. But even on a flip side of that, I think there's sometimes the assumption that there doesn't need to be any more, like that someone of a certain age or whatever is doing the best that they can be doing, and it's already loud, so it doesn't need to be any better. If that makes sense. That you hear a large voice but it's still unfocused, or you hear a sound that seems strident, and so you try to do the best to get someone to sort of rein it in and sing less, so that you can get control of that. There is a way to improve those things without putting a clamp and trying to take away voice. As long as it's comfortable. I mean, you have to use the person you have to continually be asking how comfortable and how easy the sound is, or the production of sound is. Because if it's effort, I mean, if you see veins popping out and they're turning red, and clearly, this is not a relaxed thing that's happening. But when it is working and it is, big, that this is acoustics, that we're manipulating. It is not, all force. This is why there are these sayings like sing on the interest and not on the principle,
Right.
that you want to be operating through your use and your shaping of resonance, and not just pure muscle force, which you can get away with a lot of when you're younger. And so people will not kind of recognize the faults in those approaches until they get older. A lot of times, as you lose elasticity and you lose flexibility, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? As if you're singing with a strong technique, it just means that you're less. You can put up with abuse less. Your voice just will not respond to the abuse or the lack of, the correct approach that it would still respond to when you were 18 or 22 or 25.
Right. Alexis, are you seeing because you have you're in an interesting position because you have a cross section of your experience as a singer, and then you see how many students come into your studio and come throughout University of Alabama. Are you seeing a trend of kind of dramatic voices on? I mean, are there fewer and fewer that you're seeing, or is it kind of a pretty steady flow of singers? I know I read these articles about bigger voices becoming endangered species
Uh-huh.
or something like that, how they're on the decline. And I don't know if
Mhm.
that's like a culture of how the teachers are approaching their teaching with students, and how we've kind of talked about a little bit earlier, the way that they're identifying these things and how to be cautionary and not to oversing or those types of things. So I'm wondering, in your experience, are you seeing this decline trend, or is that just false?
I don't think I've actually been around long enough, honestly, to be able to chart anything. I mean, birds of a feather tend to flock together, right? So you tend to
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
across more people that are like you because you sort of engineer it that way. Um,
Sure.
as someone who didn't just sort of drop into fast track, I can easily see, and based on when I think about people that I went to school with and that kind of stuff, that because voices that are different, they are harder to teach. And this doesn't, it's not just dramatic voices.
Mm.
There are some, fuller lyric voices like this too, where people just sort of can't, it's not obvious exactly what it is or what it's going to be. And those take more work. They're not polished as fast, so they don't get the attention.
Mm.
Um, they don't win the competitions, they don't get the solos, they don't get, because there's something wobbly, there's something like a wobbly apple cart. It's something is off, something is not, it needs to be worked. And it just takes like a lot of experimentation and sort of and discovery to figure out, what is going on. And, there are some teachers who enjoy doing that and others who prefer to polish.
Mm.
Um, so it kind of, I guess, it kind of winds up being a crapshoot for the person
Yeah.
to find out, to be in the right place, to be nurtured, or to be, you know, uh, yeah. So I mean, you have to go looking. I think that the voices are out there. I think that they maybe have not found the right place, and it's very difficult to find the right place.
Mm.
Um, I just can't see that humanity really would have changed. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that physical characteristics, the proportion or the of people with this type of voice has changed. I think they're just either not going into singing because it's a hard thing,
Yeah.
or they start and they are, again, they don't have the early praise and the early success and the early encouragement. And so you have to be really determined to just keep going and have, those little encouraging things along the way of someone who recognizes and goes, hey, you should be doing that. You should be doing this. I mean, let me give you a sort of a personal, it's very personal example of myself. You know, again, I, I don't think every dramatic voice sort of pops out the same. There are some that sort of develop and expand as they go. And I think I'm one of those. I think you could have recognized dramatic elements of my voice very young, but I certainly don't have the same voice that I did when I was 20. Okay. Whereas, after Jesse Norman passed and you listen to, the Tanglewood recording that was going around of her at 23, I mean, most of her voice was there. um, at 23. At 23, I was not, I did not have that level of, uh, I did not, I would not say it's comparable to now, but of course I haven't gone back and listened to a tape, so I don't know, I don't remember.
Right.
But anyway, my point is that I have been sort of just gradually expanding, and I'm very comfortable with the Verdi repertoire, but not every Verdi voice goes to Wagner, right? It's not a given, and not every Wagner voice does Verdi, right? Um, but I have a particular coach that really has been trying to encourage me to go in that direction. And he's been working on me for maybe like 4 or 5 years now. And I've been really slow to take it on. But in the last year and a half, I have done so. And in 2019, I would say I've been like putting it out there. And I just did an audition this past weekend where I got some instant and very good feedback, um, saying, yes, you should move forward with this.
Ah.
But, you know, again, there are other voices that in, late 20s, early 30s, people get very excited and go, oh my gosh, you should be singing that, and you go for it. But mine has been a much more slow burn. And I probably could have started this repertoire earlier, but I was just by rights like super nervous about it. You have all the voices in your head, and you go and listen to the recordings, and you're thinking, I don't know. I don't know if I have quite that amount of heft. Maybe I have the penetration, but I don't know if I have the weight, this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you're hitting home for for a lot of folks too. I think there's a lot of people that would say they are in a similar situation in their head. They always have different dialogues going on in their mind, and there's definitely benefits too, though, that you're talking about. I mean, if you started them early, what habits as a 20-year-old would you have taken with you now? And so
exactly.
it's a good, I don't know, that's a good practice, because there's a lot of eager beavers out there that are like, I really should not have done this that early.
That's true. And I mean, taking good care of your instrument is very important, so that you will have it when you peak, because the peak is middle age. That is the peak.
Yeah.
And, we live in a youth obsessed society, and we're, everyone wants to be, find what the new next young phenomenon is. But, bottom line, I mean, part of what attracted me to singing in the first place over being a violinist, because that's how I started out, was it's an art of maturity. And literally, physically, you have to grow and you have to age in order to, it's like wine, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that's a really good piece of advice. And really one of the questions that I would have is what really is valuable for listeners who might be in your situation right now to know, Alexis, if there is any other advice or piece of information that we haven't chatted about now. What could you tell our listeners, maybe your younger self, or maybe just people that are just starting in the business? I mean, what should they know?
Yes. Okay. It's hard. And that's why everyone, some people get the varying degrees of advice, like if you could see yourself doing anything else, do it, and all that, because it's hard and it takes a ridiculous amount of money and time and obsession. But if you feel that you can do it, if it's on your heart to do it, don't waste a lot of time asking whether or not you should do it. Just go. Don't waste a bunch of time saying, I don't know, am I meant to do this? Should I do this? It doesn't matter, because there's tons of people doing it who, may or may not have been meant to do this, and they're doing it. If you don't find what you want or what you need, keep bugging people. Keep going, keep bugging. If someone's not helping you, move on to someone else.
Mm-hmm. On top of that, what resources can they turn to if they start recognizing these qualities for dramatic voice, or they feel like they're being pigeonholed by a voice teacher into doing something that doesn't feel comfortable with their voice? Where can they go to find those resources? Because I think a lot of the times people just don't know what questions to ask even at that point.
Yeah.
It's hard. Coaches are very good resources. I mean, someone who's well connected in the business, or recognized, professional coaches can be very helpful, because they have a little bit less, they have a different kind of investment in helping, the voice is the ego, and no doubt we as voice teachers can get our own ego wrapped up in who we're working with. And I think we do it to a greater degree. Sometimes we don't have the objectivity. We can't step back as well as a coach can. A coach is not going to be caught up in trying to figure out how you made the sound as much as just telling you what they heard. And I mean, this business is all about relationships and referrals. And if you ask the people that hopefully they're good enough to tell you, I don't really know, but I can refer you to somebody who might know. Or I think you should sing for this person, who might be able to give you some good feedback on who they're connected to that might be able to help. yeah, finding a good technician or a good person who understands how your voice works. Of course, as we go through our training and as our development as artists, we want to get to someone who is either extremely intimate with or almost just like us, in terms of what we have to offer vocally. You want at least an opportunity to work with someone like that, because that can be paradigm shifting. But to get your way there, to find who that is, it's a matter of talking to who you already know to see who they know. I think, and that doesn't seem like a good answer, but through school or through, your young artist experience at whatever company, or your chorus experience at whatever company, there has got to be somebody that, or a coach, a friend of yours, talk to someone that you feel like has had some success, or that you like what they do with their voice. Who do you work with, or who have you worked with? Who would you recommend that I go and try to make a connection with, and who can I sing for and get some feedback? Just get some feedback.
I love that. It's not an easy answer to that question, but it's a truthful answer. There's a lot of work involved in figuring out those answers, and it's about networking and getting seen and being listened to by a lot of people.
Yes, and it's gonna help your certainty as well, because it's not that this weekend was the first time I've ever heard anyone say, yes, you should be singing this, because I've sort of tested this out on a few people over the last 2 years. But this, I've now, I'm checking the boxes, okay, I've got 4 people who I highly respect and who are well connected that are agreeing on this. So I probably didn't have to wait till now, but now would be, a good time to, now let's see where I can take this. What can I do with this? Can I get in? And part of my feedback this weekend as well was, you're not going to maybe get as much work in this repertoire. You're going to get more work in the Verdi repertoire because everyone's doing it. But you definitely have what should be there. And I wish that I saw you in this, you know what I mean? That kind of a thing.
I think another important point you made was that a lyric voice can be trained in a similar way to a dramatic voice.
Yes.
So
Yes.
even if you aren't surrounded by dramatic voices at your school, per se, you could be reaching out to different programs so you can be heard and get coached. But you could get a really great technician that's a lyric voice. Like, for an example, my teacher, Daryl Babbage, worked at the Institute for Dramatic Voices. You know Daryl, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes, he's wonderful.
Yeah, and
Yes.
he's about as lyric as they come, but he does an amazing job with these dramatic voices that he's taken on and study.
Yes, he understands what needs to happen. And the thing about it is, anyone can do those things. It's not going to make your voice into something different. What it is cultivating resonance and releasing resistance, releasing tension. I heard a little bit of creaky voice come in there. That's horrible. It's against my religion. Absolutely. You do not have to be a dramatic voice to understand how a dramatic voice should be sounding and working. It's not some kind of mystery. It's really not. The part that's the mystery is what's happening in the larynx. But none of us have the ability to look at it while we're using it or feel much of what's going on in there anyway. What we do have control over is how we manage, how we manage our breath and what we're doing with our articulators. Chasing the kind of sort of sympathetic vibrations, that go along with the correct coordinations is really all we can do.
That's great. Yeah. Was there anything else? This is a great episode. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention throughout the episode?
We always have to take into consideration, how not just what a voice can do in terms of repertoire, but how they're going to be seen when presenting that repertoire. There is a pretty good description of things that answer sort of basic questions about this on the Institute for Young Dramatic Voices website. There's a page called "What is a Dramatic Voice?" and it's got some information there. what we're trying to do with all voices is enhance and cultivate resonance. That's what we're trying to do. So the job as a teacher is to be able to recognize, undue pressure, undue resistance, undue tension, and help to release it while using the correct tensions, as it were. Right, there is strength involved, right, with the body. I mean, if you're doing your job that way without any preconceived notions about how it must sound, like what the timbre must be like. I mean, the dramatic voice is described as having a more metallic sound, obviously more heft. And I guess what can be confusing in the early stages is when that voice is not fully, formed, it sometimes is unwieldy and sounds kind of crazy or ugly even to some people. And it's being able to see past that or hear past that there is potential for, as the voice continues to develop, that actually it will be aesthetically attractive in time. Because there are some full lyrics that, just develop really fast and are big, and everyone thinks, oh gosh, that's going to be a dramatic voice, and they're actually just a full lyric that just developed early, and it's going to continue to be what it is today. So I think this is where the waiting game and all the, well, what repertoire should there be and all that stuff happens. You've got to look at, I mean, when it comes to opera repertoire, you do need to have people look at what is basically viable and appropriate for them today. I won't say what they can get hired as today, because the trends, are in the process of changing now, on the weights of butterflies and the weights of Carmens and Don Josés. I mean, the types of voices that they're hiring for these roles right now are not the same as they always were. So it's hard to say, well, you should only, have someone learn repertoire that they could get hired doing today. I think we need to make a clear distinction between where we know a voice is going and what they can do today. So maybe one stretch piece, but not 7 stretch pieces, kind of thing. Maybe a piece is going to take more time to work on. It's not going to just be like ready for the next audition season, or a role. But I guess I encourage people not to be. You got to look at how easy is it. How much does it cost you? Do you feel like you have just, wiped out everything that you have and you could not do it again tomorrow? And that's probably a good indicator that you're not ready for it right now. But, as a lot of my friends who, fall in this category with me will say, we all have gone through a period of time where you kind of bite off more than you can chew, and you try to sing something that, or get too excited practicing or whatever and just go a little bit crazy, and then you kind of wear yourself out, and I won't say injure yourself, but you've got to put yourself on a break and sort of, after you've sort of broken it down and you've kind of broken down, and then you realize, okay, I've pushed myself to the limit, and that's just too far, and I need to back off. But you kind of can't find out, what things are unless you do a little bit of that. I don't want to speak heresy, but I mean, there's the voice teacher part of my brain, and then there's the singer part, It's
Sure.
So, I mean, there have been plenty of times where I'm like, yes, I'm going to cover such and such, and I'm just going to like go for it. And I discover some hole in my technique, and like, this is a lot harder than it should be right now. Well, it's usually it's a technical problem. So I need to seek help to get that fixed. It doesn't mean I shouldn't be singing the repertoire per se.
What I found most helpful for that, but I'm not a dramatic voice, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But was the idea, and I think it's really applicable to all singers actually, was singing what you're hireable for as your main bulk of rep, figuring out what that is, and then having an eye to the future, maybe taking a few pieces and being conscious of where your voice might go. So I think just being a really conscious singer that way, I think that's really solid advice.
Yeah, my voice teacher always, he did that same type of stuff. He said, "What can you be doing now?" I'm like a lyric baritone, and so he just said, work on your Mozart, work on your oratorio. You're going to be doing that work for the next 5 to 7 years, and then in another 10 years we'll look at other rep. I mean, maybe do some Edgar, maybe do some of that stuff, but let's work on what you can do now, what you're hireable now, which is really, really good advice, Alexis.
An easy thing to do is look at the song rep of those composers.
Yeah.
Look at the Verdi songs, look at the Puccini songs, look at again, with the higher voices, like I said, I feel like Puccini is used kind of as an entry point for some of those fuller, voices, younger, fuller voices. But again, you have to have a really solid technical foundation for that to work. And if it doesn't, if you're not ready, and some of it is psychological, some of it is, physiological. If they're just not ready, again, don't, condemn, just put it to the side and come back to it later.
Exactly.
But yeah, look at the Wagner leader, and then, some of the Donizetti.
Oh yeah.
It's a big bel canto, and that's another great place to go. And if you sing it with the voice that you have, I mean, that's the advice that always has been in my head. The positive advice is just sing with what you have today, so sing it with the voice that you have. Don't try to make it sound like anything in particular. Don't try to make it sound like, Eva Pudlish or whoever, don't be intimidated by the recordings. What my husband likes to say, Earl Hazell likes to say is, even your heroes weren't their heroes on the day of that recording. I mean, it's recorded, it's produced. Yeah. Of course you want to be excellent. Of course you want to, work your hardest, but do follow the directions and do what it is, the steps that that you're supposed to do, and don't try to make it sound like anything. That's the advice I try to give, and I try to remember myself.
Thank you so much for being with us, Alexis.
Sure.
I love teaching or talking with you. And I think this is going to be really helpful for our listeners that are dramatic voices.
Absolutely.
Great.
Alexis Davis-Hazell, thank you so much for sitting down with us and chatting a little bit about your experience with developing and then later teaching dramatic voices. We're really excited to share this episode with our audience, and we just thank you for taking the time this afternoon to sit down with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Austin.